And I'm very excited to be here with you all today. As Nicole mentioned, myself and Alina are both colleagues here at TNTP and content partners through Project Arise. I'm very excited to be joining y'all in discussing building knowledge and vocabulary a bit further. For today, we will be reviewing some of the content that you may have experienced through our Project Arise courses. If you've had a chance to engage in the Project Arise courses, some of these titles might look familiar to you. We will be diving deeper into part 4, which is specifically around comprehension. If you had not had a chance to engage in our Project Arise courses, that is okay. Welcome. And excited to dive into that content with you. All right, so our workshop outcomes are really around understanding the importance, the research, and the why behind why building knowledge and vocabulary is so crucial to supporting our students' overall reading targets and comprehension. We'll have an opportunity to really look at some examples of what this can look like in both an elementary and a secondary setting. And then we will have an opportunity to think through what could be your upcoming action steps as you prepare to implement some of these items into your own instruction. All right, so we'll go ahead and dive in through the why. We'll dive into some of the analysis and then determine our next steps. So before we really dive into like the nitty gritty of why building knowledge and vocabulary truly matters, I wanted to start off with this quote from Tim Shanahan, which is a lead researcher professor in the world of literacy. He's done a ton of work on helping educators really understand and unpack not just Common Core standards, but the shifts and why building knowledge and vocabulary matters so much. So the quote says, "Research over the past 40 years or so has made it clear that the knowledge that students bring to a text, any text, will have an impact on what is comprehended or learned from that text. The more you know, the better your comprehension tends to be." So I want to take a moment to just really think about what Dr. Shanahan said here, because what we read or what we heard is that the focus really here is on knowledge. At no point did we hear Dr. Shanahan mention reading scores, assessment outcomes, reading levels, but really knowledge. And again, that's any knowledge, whether that be through cultural context or whether that's learned knowledge, is going to impact the way that students understand that text and can access that text. So let's really think about this a little bit further and dive deep into an example of what this feels like from the student perspective. Again, if you've taken the Project Arise course already, this mandala activity might seem familiar to you. If not, again, welcome. So this mandala activity is super helpful in really understanding how some of these pieces can help us unpack a challenging text, and also what are some of the resources that can help us access that challenging text. So I welcome y'all to follow along with me. I'm going to go ahead and read this passage out loud. There are some Sanskrit words in here, so if you understand the language, apologies for my pronunciation ahead of time. But again, welcome y'all to follow along. So the section says, mandala from the Sakya school of Tibetan Buddhism depicts the Hevajra mandala, which is associated with one of the most important Dakini Tantras. It is in the lineage of the 10th century Indian Mahasuda Dambipa, which is his Dakini consort riding on a tiger, upper left corner. The Lama in the upper right corner, Kunga Ningupo, a Sakya Lama considered to be the pre-incarnation of the soul destined to become one of the Dalai Lamas. Two Sakya Dharma protectors adorn the lower corners. So if I were to just pause there and you were my student and I would say, okay, tell me what is the main idea of this passage, you'd be like, what in the world are you talking about, right? It would be pretty challenging to really pull out the main idea or to maybe explain this passage to somebody who has not yet had an opportunity to read this passage, to engage with this context. And so it really leaves us thinking, what else do we need to know to really understand what is this passage trying to tell us? Again, considering what is the student experience when we're presenting challenging and complex text, feel free to reflect in the chat or come off mute and really consider what more would you need to know to be able to make meaning from this text. We'll go ahead and take a moment here to accept some responses, again, via chat or by coming off mute.
We would have to know more about the content, because those words, we were able to read them, but they had no meaning to us. So more knowledge of that culture, of that, or that, content.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really great example of being able to decode the text, but not really being able to make connect meaning to the words that we just read out loud. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that off mute. Anyone else who would like to share, or via chat or by coming off mute?
Can you show the text again, please?
Yeah, of course. A visual would be helpful. It seems that it is describing an artifact. Absolutely. I'll give a couple more seconds here in case somebody else is wrapping up a thought. A historical timeline, yeah. Yeah, so it seems like we're all about on the same page when it comes to what do students need to be able to access this this passage, right? A visual, absolutely. First of all, what is a mandala, right? If I have never heard that word before, it would actually be really challenging for me to even understand what topic or theme we're discussing. And so a visual is absolutely helpful in this case when discussing what is a mandala. Also, a definition of a mandala, right? We know that it's a complex abstract design that is usually circular in form. So there is some uniformity to all mandalas. That it is a word that's not in English. It's a Sanskrit word that means circle. And there's identifiable points that will help me make sense of what not just this mandala looks like, but all mandalas, especially if we're talking about a greater theme here. So when thinking about that, think about what it felt like to listen to me read this passage to you with a ton of unfamiliar words and language. And then think about what is the connection that we then make once we have access to things such as graphic support, visual supports, and a vocabulary definition in the context of that passage. Consider to yourself, do you believe in your experience that these pictures and vocabulary made a difference to your own learning and access to the text? Something else that can be helpful, somebody mentioned in the chat that a visual would be helpful. It seems like it's describing an artifact. Absolutely, right? So just having this display of this visual once more next to the passage is incredibly helpful as we're using descriptive words to help students understand what is it that we're talking about. This image here allows us to anchor our focus on this specific mandala. I'm going to go ahead and read through this again, and I'm going to invite you all once again to consider the student perspective. So from the student perspective, after we've had a chance to clarify what is our topic, what is a mandala, what is a definition of a mandala, and what is it that we're describing, how does this then adjust your experience prior to my prior reading of the passage towards now? Again, I welcome y'all to follow along with me as I read. This mandala is from the Sakya school of Tibetan Buddhism, depicts the Hevajra mandala, which is associated with one of the most important Dakini Tantras. It is in the lineage of the 10th century Indian Mahasuda Dambipa, shown with his Dakini consort riding on a tiger, upper left corner. The Lama in the upper right corner is Kunya Ningpo, a Sakya Lama considered to be a pre-incarnation of the soul destined to become one of the Dalai Lamas. Two Sakya Dharma protectors adorn the lower corners. So let's go ahead and pause for a second there. And once again, reflect. Welcome you in the chat or off mute. How does this activity help build your knowledge? Meaning the additional visuals and text, and support your comprehension of the original passage. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the text mentions locations of certain images. So it's helping us, again, anchor our focus to specific parts of what this mandala is trying to describe or show. All right. Well, thank you all so much for engaging with me through that. I welcome y'all to continue to keep top of mind what the student experience will be as we're considering how building knowledge and vocabulary supports student learning. I'm going to go ahead and pass it along to Alina, who's really going to take us a bit deeper into some of the research behind building knowledge and vocabulary.
Thanks so much. And so lovely to be here with you all this afternoon. So like Siapa said, we're going to go and get nice and nerdy now with some of the research behind why this matters and think a little bit together about what the instructional implications might be for your classrooms. So this activity, and we see it in the chat, it really starts to kind of prime us to think a little bit about why it is that knowledge, and then we've been calling it out too in the chat a lot, why knowledge and vocabulary intersect, and how that just supports general reading comprehension. So we want to think about why this matters. And again, if you've taken the ARISE courses, this visual might be familiar to you. What it says is that general cultural knowledge correlates about 0.5 with reading comprehension test scores, which is about the same correlation between parents' heights and their kids' heights. And one of the things that it really brings us and the research and knowledge and vocabulary, the research is just overwhelmingly clear. The effect on knowledge and reading comprehension is just really, really strong. So we want to look a little bit into why that is. And one of the best ways that we want to do that is through something called the baseball study. So this is a study from 1988 from two researchers in Wisconsin from Marquette University. Their names are Recht and Leslie. They started to dig into a little bit about how much comprehension is really impacted by knowledge. And I want to say at the top too, this study has been replicated many times with, it's commonly known as the baseball study. It's been replicated with non-baseball contexts as well. What they did in 1988, what they were doing was comparing the relative impact of reading ability to the impact of a knowledge of a topic. And so they had a group of 12-year-old students, and they got them together, and they read a passage about baseball. And then they tested students' comprehension of that same passage. Before they tested the comprehension, they were also grouping students based on two categories. So one was whether they were high, or as they said low, reading ability. And the second was if they were high, or again, they said low, knowledge of baseball. So the first group was high reading ability students and high knowledge of baseball. The second, high reading ability and low knowledge of baseball. The third, low reading ability and high knowledge of baseball. And the fourth, low reading ability and low knowledge of baseball. And I'd like to pause here and just have you predict in the chat, which is the group that you think did best on the reading comprehension test that they gave them? Again, they had them read this passage, grouped these students. Which group did best? Group 1, group 2, group 3, or group 4? Thanks for the brave folks kicking us off in the chat. Okay, so it's pretty unanimous. Some folks thinking 1, maybe some folks screaming group 3. What about the group that might have done the second best? Who do you predict that would be? Group 1, group 2, group 3, or group 4? Okay, and here I'm seeing some 3s start to come in. 1, 1. We're going to show you the results. So what they found was that knowledge about baseball mattered a lot more than reading ability. The high reading ability and high knowledge and low reading ability and high knowledge students, they performed really, really similarly. You can see 86% and 81% on this reading comprehension test. Where we start to see really significant difference is when we get to students who had a low generalized knowledge about baseball. And so one of the results that the study showed us was this idea of with sufficient prior knowledge, low, quote, low ability students can perform similarly to these, quote, high ability students. In other words, knowledge really, really mattered here. When we think about what that means instructionally, one of the core lessons is just that it tells us that knowledge and vocabulary really starts to matter. If we go to the next slide, we can see that at its core, what that means is centering a text. So if you were with us in our fall workshop, we heard a lot about centering complex text instructionally, what that means in the classroom. If not, totally fine. You don't need that to be here today, and we're glad that you are. But one of the things, again, this study starts to kind of unpack for us is the idea of what it is that it means to center knowledge and vocabulary in the classroom. So when we think about traditional literacy instruction, you might have in the past or maybe even in current practices, like really started to kind of pick apart a standard and use a text, any text. It could be a random text, it could be something that's connected, it could be something, you know, of a little background in, but use that text to teach a standard. So in other words, my focus is main idea. I can choose any text because at the end of this lesson, I just need everyone to be able to define main idea. And really what it tells us is that instead of thinking through that approach, we want to start with that complex text, start with the knowledge and vocabulary that it has within it, and use our standards in service of deeper meaning of that text or that topic. So the idea of these reading standards really is to get together and help readers understand a text. They're really designed to be integrated and applied holistically. The bottom line of that is that the end of the goal is not a strategy, it's not a skill. The end goal is really fully comprehending the entirety of a complex text. So again, thinking instructionally what this means, we know that students need to really immerse themselves in a really high volume of text, a really high volume of literary, informational, right? Knowledge is how kids access this meaning from text, not extensive instruction on individual reading strategies. And again, when we think about the intersection of knowledge and vocabulary, like we saw through the baseball study, right? You might have, you can't really have high knowledge of baseball without starting to know some of the words that are commonly used when folks are talking about the sport. All of that kind of starts to come back together. So the next question, the next piece that we really want to dig into together this afternoon is what does that mean instructionally? And what does that mean if I'm thinking about a knowledge building classroom? What does that mean if I'm thinking about kind of building students really, really strong vocabulary? And there's a lot of, truthfully, there's a lot of answers to that question. There's a lot of things that we just, for the sake of time, don't have time to get into today. But we do want to bring 3 key strategies that we found to be really impactful in supporting students' knowledge and therefore in supporting their access to increasingly complex texts. So this is 1, focusing on multiple texts or resources on one topic. 2, attending to rich academic vocabulary. And then 3, providing opportunities for students to showcase their learning. So we're going to get into those a little bit deeper. I'll say we're going to linger a little bit more on number 2 and think a little bit strategically about what it means to really build vocabulary. So backing up to strategy number 1, focusing on multiple texts on one topic. The key idea here is that we really want to build a deep understanding with our students of multiple texts and multiple resources on a meaningful topic. So I'm going to give you a moment. I'll stay quiet for about 20 seconds so that you can take a look at the slide and look at some of the topics and then look at some of the themes. Literally, I forgot to start my timer, but I'm hoping that that was enough time to parse some of the information on the slide. What I want to what I would want you to think about is just imagining how much we could build students' reading comprehension ability is if we really build up their content knowledge and vocabulary by providing them with carefully sequenced texts that are chosen to build students' background knowledge on specific topics. So looking here at the difference between the topics and the themes, one of the ways we might think about this is if I'm thinking about a classroom, that's focused on sea mammals, just thinking about how much more vocabulary, how much richer conversation could push, how much richer an analysis of a text could push if I'm reading my 4th or 5th book with students about sea mammals, right? Versus if I'm reading just one and then kind of moving on to a different topic. And really appreciate the comment chat. And we're talking about meaning making, right? We're talking about relevancy, all of those things as well. When we think about the difference between topics and themes, the reason we want to call this out is topics tend to be more concrete and have a little bit more connection between them. Themes might be a little more abstract. So if I think about courage, I could think about like one book that has kind of nothing to do with another on courage, but still really broadly fits that theme. When we think about topic-based learning, the whole idea is that the books are really carefully sequencing and starting to kind of build on one another. And again, thinking about like this could be really fun and a really engaging way to teach. The other reason that this really matters, and we'll go to the next slide, and actually the next strategy here, is because when we think about this topic-based approach, when we think about building knowledge, we're really also talking about attending to students' academic vocabulary. So again, I want to bring you to another core piece of research. When students read a series of texts within a connected topic, there's a huge increase in the amount of vocabulary students acquire, up to 4 times the amount of topic-specific vocabulary. It occurs because when we're reading really deeply about a topic, we connect old words to new, we develop nuanced understanding, space and development. Again, the whole idea is that this can be really, really fun for students as we start to kind of build them and hold them up and see all their assets as experts about these different topics. So you can see in the visual here, we have this example of transportation and the 3 subtopics of land and water and air. You can already kind of imagine how students might get to play with and stretch their vocabulary and just learn all of these different words as they're reading this connected text. I also want to linger here a little bit more and think about why knowledge and vocabulary really matter and why we kind of talk about them together. One of the ways that we think about this is the idea of knowledge and vocabulary being what we call 2 sides of the same coin. So the idea that these outcomes and the success is just really, really tightly linked together. The reason is because knowledge and vocabulary grow together. So the more that we're learning about the world, right, the larger vocabulary gets, the more we know about the world, the more words we know, the better reading comprehension we would expect it to be because we're giving students the opportunity to really demonstrate that knowledge. The other really key fact with this is that the power in knowledge building, it's not necessarily about the topics themselves, right? It's not that we need all students to become experts in sea mammal, being sea mammal explorers. It's really about the vocabulary building, and it's really about just this connection between the two. When we look again at the research and vocabulary building, it's really clear that one of the key differences in academic disparities is just students' vocabulary. When we look at the kind of typical classroom, we know that vocabulary instruction in most schools just hasn't been frequent, hasn't been systematic enough, or has maybe been a little too isolated from texts or topics that we're asking students to really engage with. And so again, the idea is that we want students to really retain words, we want students to get to know words in order to support their comprehension of text. We need them to have this incremental and repeated exposure to different words in a variety of contexts. And again, this really gets into the intersection between knowledge and vocabulary building. And we're going to get into this a little bit more, I'll say, with just some specific elementary and secondary examples in just a moment. The third opportunity, though, that I do want to show you before we get into those specific elementary and secondary examples is another strategy to build knowledge. So giving students really clear opportunities to showcase learning. So the idea that students can communicate their knowledge through vocabulary, they could be reading, they could be writing, speaking, listening, hopefully having some opportunities for metalanguaging or cross-language connections as well. There's lots and lots of different ways to do this in the classroom. And the screen, we have a couple of different lightweight and then one structured example. So lightweight just being some graphic organizers where hopefully you can see this on your screen. I know it's a little bit small, but the one on the left being where students are just writing down kind of the topic that they're writing about or books that they're engaging with, and some core words that they're really pulling out from these books. The one on the left of lightweight, where students are able to ask some questions and kind of like say what they're learning about a topic. What we might say would be like a little bit of a lighter example. Could also be something a little more structured where we're giving students a prompt where they're asked to kind of say some of the knowledge that they have been building in a text. And if you see the tier 2, tier 3 vocabulary word bank below, ideally using some of that vocabulary from their work. And if you have high quality instructional materials, some of these might be integrated part of it. Or if you don't, kind of, it might be something again to think about of how, if I'm using a unit where I'm giving students lots of opportunities to build knowledge, am I also giving them an opportunity to showcase their knowledge? And again, we'll go into this a little bit more and look at some examples in an elementary and a secondary classroom in just a moment. Before we do, though, I do want to just do a quick pause, and you'll see this again in some of the knowledge building matter in our guys. But just to call out something that I've seen in the chat and know that it's really top of mind for many folks. It's really a matter of equity when we're thinking about access to complex text and access to knowledge and vocabulary, especially for students who would say maybe historically marginalized, so including students who are multilingual learners, students with disabilities, students who are dually identified. The first thing I'm going to call out just for access to complex text for multilingual learners is this idea of text being mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors. As a matter of equity, multilingual learners need access to qualitatively complex text, right? We don't want to just give them kind of simplified versions of simplified vocabulary or simplified knowledge. It might not even be the way that we end up using academic language. It might not have that kind of cohesion that we need to make text meaningful. We really want to give all of our students an opportunity to interact with these texts and again, build knowledge in a systematic way. The second thing we want to call out is that centering complex text to build knowledge can at times mean that students might be unfamiliar with the theme or with the topic of the text, right? Like we know that students are bringing tremendous assets into the classroom. And sometimes we need to have some sort of explicit instruction on background knowledge to serve as an entry point so that all students can access this text and access their learning. And again, we're going to see an elementary and a secondary example in just a moment. The third thing we want to call out is just thinking about students' exposure to and then their use of academic vocabulary, that we want to think about teaching explicitly some of the academic vocabulary that students need in order to comprehend text. Many students, especially multilingual learners, can benefit from additional supports. It might be something like graphics or cognates or different kinds of visuals. We really want to make sure that our instruction is giving students the opportunity to hear and to really practice using academic vocabulary, both verbally and then also through their written texts. So with that, that was a lot of me talking at you. I'm going to pause right here and would love to just give you a moment to jot down some key thoughts where you're sitting. If we can go to the next slide. And just to write in the chat, how does building knowledge and vocabulary provide equitable access to reading instruction for all students? So what are some of the things that you're sitting with after listening to some of our introduction? And I know sometimes it can take a couple of minutes to get all your thoughts down in the chat. So take your time if that's you. I really want to hear your thoughts and your voice. Thanks so much for kicking us off. Here, yeah, communication's key. Literacy is freedom, language is power. Beautifully, beautifully said. All students, right, come with the same background knowledge, right? We're kind of lifting up students' assets and we want to think about student experiences. Really appreciate, yeah, there's a potential to level the playing field. Oh, no, it always takes a minute to type in the chat because then all the responses come in at once. Students need to learn, use academic and content vocabulary. Yeah, keep these responses coming and encourage you if you have the chance to just read through some of your responses from your colleagues across the state. Really, really beautiful summaries and beautiful learnings in here around just the importance of knowledge and vocabulary. Just for the sake of time, again, please keep it coming in the chat. I'm going to move us to the next slide just so we have enough of a chance to look at an elementary and secondary example. And don't get scared if you see the word breakouts on the screen. We're doing breakouts for one key reason, and that's because we want to give you a chance to have some specific grade level time. So looking at a video example from an elementary room and starting to talk about some of the knowledge and vocabulary building strategies in that context. And then for secondary folks to look at a different video example in a secondary room and to talk about knowledge and vocabulary building strategies in that context. So when you see breakouts, if you are off camera, fully understand, I know it's the start of a work week, end of a long day for many of you. Don't get scared, please stay with us. What we're going to do is in just a moment, you are going to see breakout rooms open. We're going to ask that you select into an elementary or a secondary room. Again, please come as you are. If you're able to come on video, that's excellent. If you're not able to come on video, that is also excellent. We're happy that you're here. If you're looking at this and you're like, you know what, I just can't work in a group right now, that's okay too. We invite you to stay in the main room. And what Siapa's done is she's dropped the participant guide in the chat. I'm going to invite you to open that up and you're going to have full access to the breakout slides, the videos, the conversation that we're going on so that you can engage in this learning independently. So for folks that are joining us, Siapa and myself into these breakout rooms, we're going to be there for about 15 or 20 minutes to look at this video example, to think about what this means for your context. Again, if you're not able to join us, please stay in the main room. You're welcome to stay here and take a look at that participant guide so that you can go through some of these materials yourself. And as a helpful hint, don't want to forget to mention this, if the breakout rooms aren't showing up for you, what you're going to do is select more, or if you see those 3 dots, and then you should be able to find breakout rooms. So Nicole, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and opening those, if you haven't already. And it looks like they just got opened. You see it's room 1 and room 2. So room 1, elementary K5. Room 2, secondary 612. Again, you are also more than welcome to stay in the main room and go through some of the materials yourself.
Thanks, Nicole. I hope everyone had a wonderful breakout experience. I know elementary room had some really great reflections and discussion around the example video that we got to see on building knowledge and vocabulary. As we dive, oh, thank you so much, Oliva. As we prepare to close out our time together, which I know just flew by, I wanted to bring us back to the 3 main ideas that we discussed as we were entering our breakout spaces. And really, this is some of the information that Alina shared with us prior to entering our discussion around how we're supporting students with accessing these complex texts and ensuring that they have access to build knowledge and vocabulary. So before the reading, we really want to make sure that we are introducing the topic and relevant background information. This is crucial to ensuring that our students have a strong access point to the topic that we are discussing. We know that certain topics, especially topics that are unfamiliar, depending on our audience and the grade level we're teaching, can be really challenging for students to discuss without having that anchor entry point. And so this could really be a make or break for students as they're discussing something that is not part of their everyday conversation or experiences. As we are working through the complex text, we want to make sure that we have points, pausing points for checks for understanding during that reading. We discussed a bit in the elementary room how really having that pausing point and demonstrating or giving students opportunity to demonstrate how that learning is relevant to them can really help bring in that knowledge and help engage them that much more with the complex text. And then we always want to provide opportunities for students to demonstrate that discussion and writing. Not only is this important for students' own learning, that they're having an opportunity to have input through reading and listening, and that output for discussion and writing, but also as educators, we want to make sure that we're gathering that formative assessment data as we're moving through a complex text so that we understand what students are learning, what are some parts of the complex text that we need to review and come back around to, and then how can we really solidify the depth of understanding of that text. All right, so as we're getting ready to transition out, we did want to leave you with some resources. The first one is around building classroom libraries. This is definitely not new, a new skill by any means, but something that can be so powerful as we're introducing students to unfamiliar topics, new topics, or as we're just continuing to build knowledge around topics that are already interesting for students. As Alina had mentioned, we know research has told us that building knowledge for students can have really great impacts on students' ability to make meaning of a text. And one of the best ways to do that is just to build our classroom library around topics. And so the idea here is to consider how there are some conceptually connected topics, how we can group books and group our library around vocabulary and content that is similar so that students understand how to dive deeper into that topic on their own. And then, of course, bringing in some topics that students want to read about, right? If it's, again, all about knowing our audience. So if we know that we have students in our classroom that are really passionate about a specific topic, it's always great to bring in some additional resources to encourage students to want to do a bit of deeper dive. Some strategies that can help your classroom library here are labeling the baskets or bags or bins or whatever organizational system you have for your library books. It's always really helpful to frame and introduce it, right? So we can drop it in as an Easter egg and hope students can find it, or we can just pause and take a quick moment and explain to students why we're bringing in this additional topic into our classroom library and how this can be meaningful for their own learning. We can also help students pick books that they're interested in. We know that that is a skill that is so relevant to students as they're learning how to navigate through books and specifically with topics that they may have not had a chance to deep dive yet. And then monitor some of their progress through informal or formal times. And then if you all dive back into your participant guides, you will find the links to some of these resources as well. I'm not going to get too deep into them now, but these are from some of our wonderful partners, student achievement partners, where they have posted some really great resources, including already pre-created lessons on the Read Aloud project that help us set up our own instruction to build knowledge and vocabulary. We also have a great guide on creating text-dependent questions that really support us in that during part of our lesson to ensure we have appropriate pausing points and checks for understanding for students. They also have a really great resource on supporting all learners with complex text and helping them access that learning. And then, of course, our wonderful resource of our Project Arise course, which you can access for free and dive deeper into the content that you saw today and at other workshops. All right, with that, I want to thank you so much for your time, and I'll pass it back to Nicole.
Great, thank you, Siapa and Alina, for that fabulous presentation. Those of us who are sitting in the waiting room, we're just maybe a little thinking we would have enjoyed being in there because there were looked like there were some great conversations happening. But If you did want to stay on afterwards, please do stay on. I know there were a few questions. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So coming soon, there'll be a follow-up. I just dropped in a survey link. If you can get started on that, that would be great. We love and appreciate whatever you are able to share with us about these sessions. It helps us hone our next steps. You should be getting a follow-up email. And if you would like a certificate of participation, we need you to put in your first, last name, and your email address into the chat. That's one of the reasons why we have you sign in, but it does allow us to give documentation that you were present today. And moving on to the next. So we have one last opportunity for thank you, Bianca. We have a last opportunity for a workshop, and that is next Monday, and it will be hosted by the National Center on Intensive Intervention. And we'd love to see you there. And finally, we have our survey, which we dropped in. Thank you, Sandra. I see your information in there as well. We'll make sure and get that certificate to you. I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank our presenters. It's been super informative, and we appreciate everyone's participation. And with that, I will close out the recording and invite you to stay on if you have questions.